So this is some of my favorite stuff in math to cover. The Pythagorean Theorem, missing hypotenuse. So when that big word right there means hypotenuse. I gotta get my pencil. There we go. So hypotenuse is the longest side of a triangle, a right triangle specifically. So when we talk about a right triangle, that means there's a right angle. And then if you look opposite that right angle, you will see what we call the hypotenuse. That is the longest side of any right triangle. Okay. Now there's some power in right triangles. This stuff, I've talked to people that work in the engineering field that deal with planes and missiles and things like that, and they said that geometry is one of the biggest things that they use all the time. So when we talk about the Pythagorean theorem, we are taking this side A and we are squaring it, which means we're multiplying it by itself. So we write right here A squared. Then we take this side B and we square it. And what they found with a right triangle is when you take those two sides and you square them and add their squares together, that will be equal to the third side, or the hypotenuse, squared. Okay, so A is referred to as a leg, B is referred to as a leg of that triangle, and C is referred to as the hypotenuse. Hypotenuse. All right, so how do we use that? We take a look at some examples. If we follow that pattern of A squared plus B squared equals C squared, all we have to do is take each of the legs and square them. So I'm going to take 4 and square it. That means 4 times 4. And I'm going to add to that 3 squared, and that will be equal to C squared. So if I take 4 squared, I get 16, 4 times 4. And 3 squared, I get 9. And that's equal to C squared. Okay, this is an equation just like any other equation. We're trying to find the value of C. So I've got to take 16 and add 9. That's combining like terms. That gives me 25. And that's going to be equal to whatever C is squared. So we took a number and we multiplied it by itself and we got 25. Well, there's only one number that we can do that with, and that's a value of 5. But because oftentimes that number that's on the left-hand side, it's not real obvious what the answer is, we take the opposite of squaring a number, and that is the square root, and that's a button on your calculator. So we're taking the square root of C squared. The square root undoes a square, and what it does is it returns just the thing that we were squaring. So when I type in, I can't type in a C on my calculator, but when I type in a number that was already squared, what it does is it returns the number that we squared, the number we multiplied by itself. So when I take the square root of 25 and I find the button on my calculator, it is I'm trying to find the square root here, square root button. It is right above the x squared button on your calculator. So we have to hit the second function and then hit the x squared. But first thing I have to do is type in that value. So I type in a 25 and I hit second function x squared. Okay, and that's the incorrect pattern. So the first thing I have to do is hit second function x squared and then type in the 25 and I hit equals and it gives me 5. So on your calculators you have to do the second function x squared first and then type in the number that we're trying to find the square root of. So square root says that 25 was the result of multiplying some number by itself. Well, we all know that 5 times 5 is 25. So the value of C, or the hypotenuse, the longest side of the triangle, is 5. And we can verify that it's the longest side by looking at the other two sides. 3 and 4 are definitely smaller than 5. Same idea for number 2. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. A is 8 squared, and the truth of the a and b, you can mix them up, but technically I just did because opposite angle b is 8, and so that really should go in as b, but it makes no difference because we're squaring them first and adding them together, and the order that we add numbers does not have any effect on the result. So you can plug them in either place as long as they represent a and b. There are some times where we're trying to find one of the two, a or b, and then we have to make sure that we plug in the value for c. But right now, all we're doing is trying to find c. So I take 8 squared and I get 64, and 6 squared and I get 36. Again, combine like terms. 64 plus 36 is 100. And take the square root of both sides. Okay, and the square root of c squared is c, and the square root of 100 is 10. And so again, you can see that that is the longest side of the triangle. Okay. Now I'm going to scroll on down. Okay, we've got pages. Now, there's not a lot of problems. There's a lot of pages because they only fit. This one only has 2 problems and so on. Find the exact length of the hypotenuse. Okay, so in the upper right-hand corner, exact length means leave it in. We want to leave it in the square root symbol. Okay, because that is more precise than trying to round or trying to cut off decimals. Okay, so we're going to end up with decimals here. We are still looking for c because opposite the 90-degree angle is the letter c. That's the hypotenuse. So I am still using a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And so I put in, again, doesn't make a difference, but I'm going to do 2 squared plus the square root of 8, and that whole thing is being squared, equals c squared. 2 squared is 2 times 2, which is 4, and when I take the square root of 8 and I multiply it by itself, I get 8. When you square a square root, you get just the number that's inside of there. Okay, basically these two things, the squaring, let me get a pointer, this cancels out this. Okay, so those, anytime you have a square root, it just cancels out the symbol and we are left with the number that's inside. Okay, so we have 4 plus 8, which is 12. And what they're saying by leave it in square root means that we're going to do this. We're going to take the square root of both sides, and my answer is going to be the square root of 12. Because if you take the square root of 12 in your calculator, so if I go second function x squared, type in a 12, I hit equals, it gives me 3.464101615, blah, 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 blah. It keeps on going. So instead of being less accurate by putting in a rounded decimal, we leave it as the square root of 12. Okay? So that's what they mean by leave it in that form. Now they want us to round to the nearest tenth. So sometimes we're going to leave it as the square root. Sometimes we're going to round it to a decimal place. Nearest tenth is the first decimal place. So again, we are looking for the hypotenuse. So I go a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So I'm going to go 5 squared plus 9 squared equals c squared. 5 squared is 25. 9 times 9 is 81. And when I add those together, I get 106. Now, if I had you practicing memorizing your perfect squares, you will find that 10 times 10 is 100 and 11 times 11 is 121. And so 106 is not a perfect square. And so this is where we end up with a decimal. When I take the square root of both sides, obviously I get c over here. But then when I type in second function, x squared 106 equals, I get 10.29, and the 9 causes the 2 to round up. So that's what they mean by rounding to our nearest tenth. Not that you don't already know that, I hope. All right, so that's how we leave the answer. C is, and technically I should write this, 10.3, and I put a wavy equal sign. A wavy equal sign means approximately equal to. Okay, so I really should change it to that. Anytime you round an answer, you should change it to the approximately equal to symbol. Okay. Let's take a look at the other pages. Now, we're talking about word problems here. So we have to figure out what the triangle looks like. Every one of these is going to create a right triangle. So a rectangular field with length of 80 yards and width of 60 yards. So we do this. This is 80. This is 60. Length and width. What is the length of the diagonal? So we draw a diagonal in here, corner to corner. That means here, because it's a rectangle, that is a right angle. So this side that we're trying to find the length of, the diagonal, is C. Okay? So again, I form a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared, and I plug in the values. 60 squared plus 80 squared is equal to c squared. 60 squared, 60. And here's where I can use the actual x squared button. If I just go 60, hit the squared button, then I can go plus 80, hit the squared button, and equals, and it gives me 10,000. So that is 60 squared plus 80 squared. And I go square root. And so in my calculator, I type in second function square root 10,000 equals 100 is equal to C. Okay. Same idea here. A string is tied to the top of a 5-foot flagpole. So here's my flagpole. And pulled taut to the ground. The base of the flagpole is 9 feet away from the string. So this distance here to the string, this is our string. Okay. That is 9 feet, and this is 5 feet. So again, I'm using a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So I have 5 squared plus 9 squared equals c squared. 25 plus 81. And that gives me, again, 106. And this says 100th of a foot. Okay, so we're going to round to the hundredths place. That's the second decimal place after we take the square root. So we take the square root of both sides, and we've already determined, if I go second function x squared, type in 106 equals, that was 10.295. Now the 5 causes the 9 to go up, so I'm going to write 3 decimal places. We want to round to 2. I made a mistake here, and that is the approximately equal to, because it's not exact anymore once I take the square root. So the 5 causes the 9 to go up, but if the 9 goes up, so does the 2. Okay, because the 9 becomes a 10, and then that causes the 2 to go up 1, so we still end up with 10.3, but this time we're going to put the 0 in there because they wanted 2 decimal places. Okay, And that's the same idea with all of these. So what you have to do is you have to figure out what your legs are of the right triangle, and then you have to see if, make sure that we're looking for the hypotenuse. A 26-foot long ramp is to reach 10 foot up a wall. Okay, so this ramp is going to be 26 feet. Well, the 26 feet is here now, and the point that it touches the wall is 10 feet up. The ramp covers a horizontal distance of 24 feet. To make the ramp less steep, the horizontal distance is doubled. To reach the same 10-foot height, how long will the ramp be? So right now we have this. We want to double that distance. So I'm going to move the page a little bit so we can show double that distance out. So instead of 24 feet, we're going to have 24 plus 24, or 48 feet total. Now we need to figure out the distance from here up to here. So we're still looking for C. So again, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. There's our C. Plug in the values, and I want you to finish this one on your own. Okay, and then the rest of the pages. Again, it says 11 pages. We have plenty of time. We'll take the rest of this week if we have to in order to get all of these done, because I want to make sure that you fully understand them. All right, and it also says here round to the nearest hundredth, so that's 2 decimal places. All right, so you're going to square both numbers, add those squares together, and then take the square root of your answer.